In what ways does your media product use, develop, or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? Looking at my film article, there is a lot to take in. Immediately when you look at my film article, you'll see the two main characters, Alicia and Michael. What I've done to the picture is I've added a filter, which I've used also similarly for my short film, so in a way, by adding the filter, it's echoing the short film. It's also very conventional of sci-fi films, particularly if they're apocalyptic, to add a filter. Usually this will be a darker, it can be in a black and white tone, or it can have a sort of blue tinge to it. What you'll find in this film article is that I've toned down, I've desaturized it to make it look as if the colour is draining from the two characters' faces, and to kind of emphasise the emotion and the dramatic atmosphere by making it seem more foreboding, and it makes the reader wonder why the characters are in the situation that they are. By pairing this with the title Derange, it immediately gives the reading that something bad will happen in the film. Derange is typically a word you might associate with someone being psychotically ill. You might think that it should be deranged, and I did mention this in the article, however I know this won't be assessed. If you're talking about deranged, you're talking about how someone is already mentally or psychotically ill. But if you're talking about deranged, you're talking about someone it's to go about making someone ill, or say just before someone's become psychotically ill. So the idea of derange is to show that in this film people will be subject to inoculation, a mass inoculation, which will turn people psychotically ill and deranged. And as that should be reflected into the picture, where we have the colours draining from their faces, suggesting that something bad is going to happen, and that's very conventional and stereotypical of sci-fi films to show. What I've got is a pairing, a stereotypically heterosexual couple. In the film they're not really much of a couple, it's just more that they're a pair, and it is very conventional to have two main characters. If you look at the Hunger Games, in my Catching Fire analysis you will find there is Katniss and there is Peter. The difference between them two and my two characters is Katniss is put in front of Peter to show that she's more dominant, she has more importance in the film. In my one, I have Michael in front of Alicia, showing that he is the more dominant character. I did mention in that analysis about how Katniss was subverting the stereotypical feminine archetype. In this one, it seems that although Alicia, when she's in the footage of the film, she is in ways subverting the feminine archetype, it's almost as if Michael is conforming to the masculine archetype, and it's doing so strongly here because he's standing in front of her. It shows that he's more dominant stereotypically, and that he has more power. He is the one to save all and to be the one to end all. As we see in the short film, that he's almost like the last survivor, except we don't know who is getting the tape. In other words, looking at the poster, you immediately get the reading that stereotypically he is the more dominant character. Looking at some of the more recent films to have come out, these apocalyptic sci-fi films stereotypically use a girl as a central character. You can look at Divergent, Host, Hunger Games. So you could say that by having the main character as Michael, I am subverting the conventions of a sci-fi film. However, if we look at The Maze Runner, which I do mention in my film article, you have the central character, which is called Thomas. So in some ways I can say that I do conform to the conventions of sci-fi genre by having this central character, but in many ways it's not always like that. If you look in the background, it's also a forest area. Conventionally, sci-fi apocalyptic films will have either urban or rural areas, so by having this background in quite a decrepit state, I suppose, I'm conforming to conventions again. Title, as I said, I've explained it in my poster analysis, that it looks futuristic. It looks like something you will see in another sci-fi movie, and so therefore it is conforming because it's in capital locks as well, suggesting violence. Violence is a theme to come under the sci-fi genre, so it's conforming to the sci-fi genre again. Also, that's something you will find in horrors. It makes it seem more foreboding, and as said, that links with the picture, which looks like maybe something's going to happen, and it's typical of, say, horror films to use a filter which will create an atmosphere which is going to be quite scary and tense, and that's a theme to come under the sci-fi genre, so you could say, yeah, I am conforming to the conventions there. We have a quote in the top right corner of my film article, and it says, "It's the Maze Runner evolutionized. The longer you hide from fear, the longer you take to die." I was inspired to use that quote, which I wrote myself, just putting the thing there, by looking at the article about Thor. In that one, they said it's the Empire Strikes Back, and then it says sort of thing, which I've done there, but by repeating the word. I use repetition for the word longer, and then alternatively it was used differently there. Obviously, I'm not saying it is this other book, franchise, this other film, but what I'm saying is I'm comparing my film to that one, so people that are the fans of the previous film can link back to my film and know with some sort of self-assurance that this is a film that will interest them and it will be aimed at them. The Maze Runner is aimed at 12-year-olds and up. My film is aimed at 15-year-olds and up, so there could be some conflict there. But by instantly saying it's the Maze Runner revolutionised, I'm linking it back to that genre, to say the apocalyptic sci-fi area, and yeah, and I've also used that font and echoed it with the subheading. The subheading, as you see, will say Giles Britton Snell allies with Lloyd Jones for a palpitating, coma-inducing nightmare of a film in the psychotic horror sci-fi derange. I've used a similar style for writing that as was found in The Wolf of Wall Street. The font is kind of similar to the title. It's that sort of, it's a sans serif font which is less formal, echoing the quote. And as I've already described before, the sans serif helps to show that informality and the breakdown of conventions in society, and how everything is going to pot, and that's helping reflect the plot in my film. And then obviously, if that's happening, that is a very conventional part of sci-fi films to include something like that. I have used the font in a way that looks also sci-fi. I use red writing, red typography, to make the two names stand out. Red connotes violence, blood, sorts of blades, any sorts of act, and which is dangerous. So by doing that, not only is it echoing the name of the magazine that I've done called Aspire, but it's also kind of keying in the theme of horror, which an audience can expect in this film. And horror is a theme which conventionally is used in many sci-fi films. So therefore, by including that colour choice, I am also conforming to conventions of sci-fi genre, particularly the ones that have horror themes to them. I've used two columns on the right side of my article, where I've got the text, and to mark out each paragraph, I've done the first line of each paragraph either centre or right aligned, wherever appropriate, just to mark it out, as this is conventional of film articles to use. At the bottom you'll see there's like aspire.com, subscribe to aspire.com/sub, April 2015, the issue date. They're just the general details which you'll always find in magazine articles in many cases, and that's just helping the audience to see that it is a magazine article and not just a bit of paper talking about a film. So although that's not necessarily helping to convey the genre, it is helping to show the conventions of a magazine article and how an article might be structured, so as to make it obvious to the audience what they're reading is part of a professional magazine.